your house is on fire. It started in the kitchen, it's moving to the living room, and the fire is advancing. The fire brigade and the fire engine arrives in front of your house. But they don't get out of the fire truck, and you run up to the fire truck and you say, "Hurry, hurry, the house is on fire." And they said, "Wait, we have to negotiate first. What materials are we going to use to put out the fire?" Now, and as they're talking, the fire's going on. I said, how much are you going to pay us to put out the fire? But wait, the house is on fire. Are we going to use a material to put out the fire that then is going to have, it's going to be cancerogenic, it's going to be, then you're going to have to pay to clean it up at the whole time? So what do you say? Just whatever, we accept your conditions. Go in and put out the fire. He said, by the way, what's the name of your fire department? It's called Fire Department Merck. This is the condition when we are faced with something that's urgent, indeterminate, and people have to make quick decisions. And the way we've posed these decisions here is what I call end of the pipe. End of the pipe. Which means, like, oh, we're going to solve the plastic problem in the world by recycling plastic. We're going to solve the problem of sewage by sewage treatment. We're going to solve the problem of climate change and emissions by putting bigger filters. Do those solutions work? No, none of those solutions work because we don't get to the root of the problem. We don't get to the model of innovation. All of the problems we've talked about a broken biomedical system, it's totally broken. When I say broken, it's broken for wealthy countries like Denmark, and it's especially broken for countries like Botswana or Nepal who don't have access, because we suffer a double problem in the world that have to do with medicines and health treatment. One is drug obesity, which is, many people have spoken about this today, which is causing a lot more health problems often than it's helping. But also in the world, we're suffering drug famine. So obesity and famine are two sides of the same coin. Don't forget, there are millions of people, and a recent study on cancer treatments published by the WHO shows that children, millions of children are dying from treatments that could prolong or help them in the global south, in the poorer countries, for many, many different types of treatment. And we live in a world where people think as well that there are technological solutions to political problems, which isn't true. They feel that there's a pill for every ill. Why do they get into this idea of a pill for every ill? It's also part of psychiatry. It's part of the psychiatric idea that the problem is in your head. So the problem is in your head, so you'll solve it in your head. Not true at all. The problem is out there. It's in relationships. It's the air we breathe. It's in our jobs. It's in our families. It's in our communities. Much of the discourse of the broken biomedical policy here, especially here in Europe, is anti-political. It's anti-political change. It's making you weak to make political change because you're just seen as an isolated, narcissistic, egotistical individual, and everything is just happening in your head, when actually we are feeling human beings and animals who are breathing and sociable and getting all that out. Now, you have a whole new vision of things when you look at life in that way. Today I'm going to focus on speaking about a different biomedical system and what are the problems of it, and very shortly why it's broken and how we could change it. The first idea is open and closed. I'm sorry, I don't know if you can see this. This is a very big study. It's part of our report that you could read the whole report. It's called From Lab to Commons, a recent study on how to change our biomedical system. And you could see on the top, you see a closed model, which our present model, our closed model, which is about patents, enclosing information, confidential commercial information, trade secrets, copyright, everything behind paywalls. And that's all of the accumulation of effort you have to make to even develop one more or less successful molecule on the top. The open model that we defend is much, much better for ensuring an adoption. There's knowledge accumulation that's very, very fast. It's much better to de-risk because you're showing the failed studies as well and not only the successful studies, getting over publishment bias. There are larger pool funds, and of course the open model, if you have a socially responsible license, are you going to charge what they charge now for orphan drugs, 200,000 euros or $200,000 for one treatment? No, because these medicines will be able to come out as generics from the first day. The innovation model today is based on the closed model. It's based on enclosure, secrecy, fraud, fooling people. The open model with rules, and I'm not naive, I know many people would say, well, the commons, what about the tragedy of the commons? If everyone uses it, it will become depleted. In the case of medicines, this is obviously true. In the case of disease, of the air, of climate, of biodiversity, which is now getting totally depleted, which are major healthcare problems and public health problems. But in the case of medicine, we are suffering the tragedy of the anti-commons, the tragedy of incredible privatization, of enclosure, of manipulation only for extraction, not for regeneration. An open model is to regenerate, to put back in as much as you take out in repositories, in local groups of doctors who work together, in cooperatives, in helping the community. Whereas the extractive model that we have today means the average drug company needs to make 15, 20, 30% profit, hundreds and millions, to be able to reinvest between 5 and 10% in research. You all know where the rest of the money goes, into marketing, into lobbying the European Parliament, running after people like Margrethe Auken, and that's massive. That's actually massive. Okay, so how could we change the system? One way is to move from this closed model based on patents, based on the paywalls, based on not having all of the clinical trial information, which, for example, we started fighting against Peter Gauthier, Margrethe Auken and I. In the beginning of 2010, we started organizing events, also with the support of people like Ben Goldacre and many others, to change all the rules of clinical trial access. We've achieved that the clinical trial reports should be accessible in the future, but all of that 99% of the medicines that already exist before the law going into effect are still secretive. We don't have access to that information. 2 days ago, there was a very important European Court of Justice ruling about glyphosate, the Monsanto Terminator herbicide drug. The European Food Safety Organization, which is here in Copenhagen, for years and years had denied people, members of the European Parliament Citizens Group, the scientific reports that based the extension of approval of this herbicide. They said this is secret, commercially confidential information, we can't give it to. European Court of Justice just said public health is more important than commercial confidentiality. We're not even... We want to use this court decision for more access to clinical trials. This is about transparency. Many people here, like Tom Jefferson and others like Peter, they can dissect the clinical trials paid for by industry and find the fraud, the statistical manipulation, etc. They could tear it apart, but sometimes it takes them 2, 3, 4 years. I don't want that to happen. Of course, I want transparency, but I think we don't need that to happen. How do we avoid the garbage in and the garbage out? How could we avoid that so people like Peter and Tom Jefferson and others don't have to go through all this information for so many years? That means we have to go to the source. We have to go to the root of the problem. Who is doing those clinical trials? Who is developing the medicine? Who decides that what is really killing people, for example, antibiotic resistance. No one has developed any decent antibiotics for the last 40 years. Why? It's not a good business. People take it for a week, for 10 days, and they don't take it anymore. And they're stuffing all of our meats that we're eating with these antibiotics as well. And it's getting into our water. So there's no interest. How could we change things on its head to make an interest for public health issues that really matter? And the antibiotic issue is really interesting because it's perverse. A drug company wants to sell as much as it can to make a profit. In the case of antibiotics and many other drugs, the best situation is the least antibiotics you take. It's kind of like paying a rubbish collection company, oh, we're going to pay you by the kilo. Do they have any incentive to reduce the production of rubbish? Not at all. Not at all. This is what happens with Kafir. So you could see our present system, I don't know if you could read that. It's a bit, you can't make it any bigger, no? No. Okay. The present biomedical innovation system is individualized, personal, and company gain is an incentive. We are these isolated individuals. All we want to do is to make more money. And that's what moves people. We're self-interested. There's no general interest, which is false. That's why many people say scientists and many scientific people and doctors, that's not often their main motivation, just making money. Of course, that's what the publicity says. And obviously, what we want to do is take the prices of medicine and the R&D done, separate that totally. We want to unbundle the whole R&D and pricing system from each other. So what we study should be driven by public health concerns, curiosity-based science, and not by the price of medicine. There's this false idea among people that's promoted by all the politicians, well, the drug companies need to make tons of money so they can invest in innovation. Absolutely false. Absolutely false. And this said over and over and over again until we believe it. And what has happened? We have lost our ability of having a social imagination. What is the future we want in the world? What's the future we want? If we continue the way we are today, we all know, what the environmental future is going to be, what the social future will be with hundreds of millions of disinherited people without food, without ways of living. Do we want to continue on this extractivist, personalized, profit-oriented way? I don't think so. I don't think it's in anyone's idea. Well, I think the medical field has to be part of that. It has to be an idea where the interest has to be towards the biomedical commons, health-driven, post-IPR knowledge abundance. I mentioned scarcity in knowledge doesn't exist. The more you use an idea doesn't make it disappear. The more you read a book, the book is still there. We have been given the idea that by sharing scientific medical knowledge, by sharing, for example, I know the people in DNDi who do wonderful non-profit drug development related to MSF, Neglected Disease Initiative, and they're developing Hep C treatments and other treatments. They have a tremendous difficulty in getting the banks of data of all the molecules that have been done by the pharmaceutical industry to go through that data. So abundance is sharing information. We say we have to share designs and science globally, and we have to produce where possible locally, according to local conditions. We are abundant. We are rich in knowledge, but poor in materiality. So all of these has to take into account the systemic complexity of social environmental determinants of health, when today everything is product-based. It's a pill for every ill. It's very, very, very narrow. We have to promote as well public and private and civic bottom-up governance of science and health. Today it's about experts. What is our relationship with experts and non-experts? Do we have citizen science? People like David Healy on his webpage, the webpage you mentioned, what Peter Gauthier, they're constantly talking with patients, with the citizens in general. But we have this idea that science, the scientist with a lot of degrees with the white coat who lives in a cave, knows better than anyone else. Only when science is open to public debate, citizens' debate, when it's transparent about the data, can that science be pro-citizen and good science in itself? Because good science that is hidden away will never be good science. Okay, can you go to next one? What is on the table today politically? What is on the table politically? In the European Union, you have a series of proposals that would make things worse that we're trying to do damage control on. As you know, the pharmaceutical industry has shifted its whole business model from blockbuster drugs to niche-buster drugs. The blockbuster drugs was a few really incredible drugs. There's still a few around, like the hepatitis C treatment, basically, and a few others. And then there are hundreds and hundreds of new drugs that we call the orphan drugs or the niche buster drugs, which are now 50% of the drugs approved by the EMA and 60% approved by the FDA. And these are drugs that are done for orphan illnesses, mainly genomic-oriented cancer, different types of cancer illnesses. And why is this done? It's done because they're given advantages. They could have much smaller clinical trials, which are much less expensive, and they could get them on the market with early market access. And they even want that to be pushed even more with the proposal of adaptive licensing that Megraide has been fighting against, where they say they want the drugs on the market with only going through the first stage of clinical trials with smaller quantity of patients, and then we will see if the drug works in post-authorization trials once they're on the market in the hospital. This is being pushed very, very hard, and there will be a proposal probably later this year before the European Parliament, prepared by the European Commission, of orphan drug legislation that goes in this direction. What is the other issue that's very controversial now, and it's the second part of what Peter started with the European Ombudsman? Scientific advice, early scientific dialogue. The pharmaceutical industry doesn't want to invest in a drug unless they have assurance that it's going to be approved. So they start, when they're already working on a new molecule, they start talking with the European Medicines Agency and getting scientific advice of what they have to do to get the drug approved. Not what they have to do to get the drug to be effective, because you know that the criteria for approving a drug by the EMA is not that it's effective. They do non-inferiority trials, often against placebo, so it just means it has to be better than nothing. That's the situation today. But even then, they want to get this scientific advice from the EMA, and this scientific advice, which is basically a collusion between the public regulator and the pharmaceutical industry, is never published. No one knows what's going on in these negotiations. It's totally opaque. And right now, the European Ombudsman is investigating this as kind of a malgovernance of the whole system, because they are colluding to get something approved, and that whole process is not transparent. Like I said, with the herbicide and the European Court of Justice ruling, theoretically, this information should be accessible. Intellectual property incentives. This is the other thing that's on the agenda by the European Parliament. It's also in international trade agreements. Every time there's an international trade agreement between the EU and any country of the world, between the US and any country in the world, what is the number one issue that the trade negotiators are pushing? We want you to toughen up the protection of patents. We want you to extend patents. We want you to put greater trade secret laws. It's basically about pharmaceuticals. We want India, which is the pharmacy of the poor world, to extend their patent, to make all of their drugs twice as expensive, so millions of people will die. I mean, it's pretty horrible. It's pretty damn horrible. What is the argument? The argument, when I have made years ago, and other people made parliamentary questions to the European Commission saying, what is the public return of EU's investment in biomedical research, which is around 5 billion a year? The result is our main return are jobs, competitivity, and global competition. I mean, they make no joke about it. When they talk about innovation, what does innovation mean? So we ask them, what do you mean by innovation? They say, reaching the market, technology transfer. Innovation in our minds is something that helps people socially, ecologically. No, that is not true. The mindset is a mindset mainly with a euro or a dollar bill in their mind. It's about social and economic advantages. What else is on the agenda in a positive way that we could see happening in the future? Many people are fighting, obviously, for transparency, open access. Open access is about publishing. I would hope that the Institute of Academic Freedom, all of our published articles would be open access from the first day. You think so, Peter?
I don't have that much money.
Then we have to see how to get the open access out there, how to raise the money, how to do it. This is a problem. Open data. It's been a tremendous fight in the European Parliament in the Horizon 2020 program that the data used for research, of any research project of the European Union, that data should be available. Today, it is not. For a long while, they made an exception. They said, well, yes, every scientific area will have open data except one. Guess which area? Medical research. And now there's been a big pushback to weaken that. The precautionary principle. This week in the, not so fast, no.
You have 6 minutes and then...
Oh, 6 minutes, okay. Right now, as we speak here, there's a trialogue that's between the European Council, European Parliament, and the European Commission discussing the next program of research of the European Union. One of the most dangerous aspects that they're discussing is the introduction of a new principle to guide scientific research, which is called the innovation principle. The objective of the innovation principle is to weaken another principle which are in all of the EU treaties, which is called the precautionary principle. You all know about the precautionary principle. So the precautionary principle says that if there are indications of harm or bad ecological impacts, even if they're not totally conclusive evidence, and there's still uncertainty, it is possible enough to stop this technology transfer, this research, whatever. There's been a massive campaign of industry, especially the chemical industry and the pharmaceutical industry, to weaken this by introducing a new principle called the innovation principle. The innovation principle is defined by the US way of dealing with technology, which is called cost-benefit analysis, which you've probably heard of. And the cost-benefit analysis means you put on the same level harms and health or environment as the possible economic benefits that can be made. So we're fighting as the NGO community way against it. But what are the solutions? Give me 5 minutes, I'm going to go through the solutions. The solutions are to change the biomedical model. The change of the biomedical model would mean we are spending billions on drugs, on pharmaceuticals, on hospitals. What if we put aside 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of the money we're spending in the European countries, and we put it into public, civic partnerships, not public-private, public-civic partnerships, or there could be some smaller private companies involved, but majority public and civic, to do the drug investigation. Because today, all of our governments are what I call stupid venture capitalists. We invest massively in public research, but then it's patented by the private companies, and we don't get the results back. This is an absolute idiotic thing. So we want to be responsible venture capitalists. We say, okay, aside from all the issues of open access, transparency, obviously we need many new rules against conflicts of interest, et cetera, what we have to have is a new system of making drugs. We have wonderful public researchers. The problem is all of our public researchers give away all the information or sell their technology at a very small amount
David?
To the private companies. Let me finish. Give me 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes. Alternatives are also, there are alternatives like delinkage. There are alternatives of patent pools when there's an important medicine. So what is the advantage of these public-private or public-civic partnerships? We could also try out, as health technology agencies, the drugs before they reach the market, not after they reach the market today, and see if they work with large trials, with coalitions that are already being formed today between different European countries. We have the Benelux countries, you have the Mediterranean countries, who are forming coalitions to do public procurement together. Well, these coalitions, we've proposed, can also do giant public trials before the drug is approved by the EMA, or before at least it's reimbursed, and find out really if these drugs work. That would be very, very good. There's also the bottom-up, non-political solutions that are happening all over the world. I know in California, you have the do-it-yourself insulin project done by a whole bunch of biochemists who are trying to produce insulin. You know, this price of insulin has skyrocketed, and there are millions of people around the world who are dying because of the lack of insulin, when insulin shouldn't cost more than $1 or $2 a month. It's incredible, and it's up to $300 a month today. It's crazy, a lot with many other life-saving drugs. I'm talking about type 1 diabetes. So this do-it-yourself insulin, groups of scientists who get together to develop drugs on their own with what are called socially responsible licensing. Socially responsible licensing means, okay, we will only patent it or license it under certain economic, social conditions that is going to come out like a generic drug from the first day. The drug companies say it costs them $3 or $4 billion to develop a drug. We know from the Neglected Disease Initiative, which has worked on many types of diseases like hepatitis and of course the tropical diseases, that they could develop a drug for less than 200 million euros each drug. Okay. Anyways, I wanted to give you these ideas, but what I'm saying to finish things is we have to take the power into our hands and we have to act. We're not isolated individuals. Forget about end-of-the-pipe solutions, but we have to take power and be able to imagine another future, and we can't be locked in the way we are today. We are not in a cage. Thank you.